Hi everyone, welcome to our book launch this evening. My name's Jasmine and I am very happy to welcome you here to tonight's launch, which is of Mother Muse by Lorna Goodison, her new collection, which I'm sure you're all as excited as I am to hear her read from, which she will do. She's here, she's going to join us very soon and read from the book for us. She's joined by Lee Jenkins, who is here, is going to chat with Lorna later. Lee is an academic, an editor and a critic. She's written and published widely on Caribbean poetry, so it's very cool that we have her as well here with us tonight. So thanks to her for joining us. I will invite Lee on screen in just one second, but before I do, just want to run over what's going to happen so that you know where you are, what's going to go on tonight. We'll be together for about an hour. While Lorna is reading from the book, I'm going to put the text up on screen so you can follow along visually as well. Just know that if you want to like reconfigure your screen, you're in control of that and have a play around with it to make it suit your needs. If you have any technical problems throughout the event, put them in the chat and we'll try our best to help you in that way. It's great that you found the chat box. Keep your messages coming in. Let us know what you think of the reading and the event and the book and everything. When Lee and Lorna are talking later on, we would like to get you involved in their conversation. So as well as the chat box, please do try to find the Q&A box. It's a different button. It's called Q&A. If you get your questions lined up in there, then Lee will be able to put them to Lorna later on in the conversation. So I think that it would be a good time to begin. I'm going to invite Lee on screen and we'll get going with the event. So thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Jazz, and welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure and an absolute privilege to introduce Lorna Goodison as we launch Lorna's remarkable new collection with Carcanet, Mother Muse, this evening. Lorna Goodison, as most of you here I'm sure are well aware, is Professor Emerita of English and African and Afro-American Literature at the University of Michigan. Born in Jamaica and now living at Half Moon Bay in British Columbia, Lorna is, as she describes herself in a poem from the new collection, a West Coast West Indian between two wide seas. The first of Lorna's many collections of poetry, Tamarind Season, appeared in 1980. And her collected poems was published by Carcanet in 2017. Gathering poems written across 4 decades, Lorna's collected poems is a rich testimony indeed to her significant achievement. Jahan Ramazani put it perfectly, as he always does, of course, when he describes Lorna's poems as, to quote, world-traversing, yet deeply rooted. In the same year as her collected poems came out, 2017, Lorna was appointed Poet Laureate of Jamaica, the first woman to hold that title. Among her very many other honours and awards, Lorna was the recipient of the Wyndham Campbell Literature Prize in 2018 and the recipient of the Queen's Gold Medal for Poetry in 2019. To strike, if I may, a personal note, as a person, as an individual, Lorna Goodison has the same generosity of spirit that we find in her poems. I first met Lorna in 2016, here where I'm speaking from in Cork in the south of Ireland, at a conference I'd organised with my colleague at Trinity College Dublin, Melanie Otto, and the conference was on Irish Caribbean connections. I'd invited Lorna to come and read at our little event, and to my surprise and delight, Lorna accepted the invitation. With Ted, she came all the way from Canada to Cork. And Lorna gave a quite wonderful, really mesmerising reading here in Cork, very vividly bringing together in a reconfigured sequence poems about family connections and historical and literary connections as well between the islands of Ireland and Jamaica. And that sequence has since been published in Lorna's collection of essays, Redemption Ground. Lorna also traces her family's connections between Jamaica and Ireland in her wonderful book, From Harvey River, a memoir of My Mother and Her Island, which came out in 2007. So Lorna Goodison, she's a memoirist, she's an essayist, she's a poet and a poet laureate, and she's a painter as well, a very accomplished painter, as you've seen from the luminous cover of her new collection, Mother Muse, which we're here together to launch this evening. So just to repeat what Jasmine said before, after Lorna's reading, I'll ask Lorna some questions, engage in discussion. So please, audience, do add any questions or comments you may have to the Q&A function, and I'll go into those and involve you as much as we can in the discussion that follows Lorna's reading. But in the meantime, it's my great pleasure to give you Lorna Goodison.
Start reading.
Keep doing the island's housekeeping. Scour and rinse out the mouth of a river, plastic scandal bag clogged. You're a pin-up girl in a one-piece bathing suit. I saw you sew yourself. It is ruched and tucked like a washboard across your belly. Your wet let-out hair cascades down your back. You dive in and breaststroke the familiar long lap river rushing past your old childhood home, now all but gone to ruin, captured by pirate cousin. You backstroke, float and butterfly into Lucy Harbor, where I'd left you in the Bardo days after death. I'd clung to your capable hand, losing warmth as we traveled to the western shore. You stepped into the deep and embraced big sea waves, turned back to me on land and said, "You cannot come with me yet." Then off you swam. I set out for home, feet barely touching ground till I reached Constant Spring, where I lifted my eyes to the hills. "Go long," you said. "I'll be Muse. You be yourself." Good morning. Hello to everybody. The next poem is called New Year's Morning, 1965. Out of the meshmouth radio, the news trains at dawn. He'd killed her and surrendered to the Rockford police. Recall this. Some said she was wild woman, fair game for one straight blade to the heart. You stayed in bed and wept. Common knowledge, his light was inclined to combust into violence. For his unburied birth call shaded him, made the slide stick and drive him to madhouse, cramp and paralyze him. Times he broke free, his horn work outshone Gabriel's. Alumnus of Alpha Boys School for the Wayward, his mother handed him over to Sister Mary Ignatius, none more deserving of a TV show than the high-flying one of starched cornet. She was a devotee of rhythm and blues, jazz, bebop, and all other worldly music. Athlete and able coach of cricket, boxing, football, netball, and table tennis. Sister Iggy, as DJ, played the speeches of Malcolm X. For young Black men, she helped master musical instruments. Hail Iggy's students, taking her own homegrown music all over the known world. She loved Don like her own, themed rosary beads, petitioning for his peace. And for Anita Margarita Mahfouz, second generation daughter of Lebanon, gorgeous bohemian, alpha woman, blessed and cursed with nurse spirit. She, a fellow traveler with worthy women devotees of love without borders, was billed most times as a rumba dancer. Few discern how her steps retraced desert routes of camel trains. One night you caught her act at the Ad Astra, but had no words in those days to describe her. The atoms in that smoky place on Wynwood Road stirred sandstorms that caused wine bibbers to weep into rum cups. And all in these poems would have come under the influence of Rastafari, the earth's most strangest woe man. Thus spoke Raskomi. And these words are offered in thanks to those who started flames that consumed them as they blazed trails so that we are now free to be musicians, dancers, thinkers, writers, artists, mystics. Sugar. Perfumed by sugar's money musk, her newly refined ancestors took upon themselves airs of Mount Plenty. Aromatic sweet canes render bitter waters potable. Canes cultivators, the millions of stolen Africans counted by Massa as less than, and the young Mary was raised not to follow them or consider them playmates, for you and them are not companion. But the girl was alive and quick to her people's music, shivered her feet to boer drums, sheltered wild notes escaped from blackbird work gangs, marked converter call to score new beats drummed into barrel staves the one-drop way. She made moan to sorrow songs, belly band of what hard labor breaks. Oh, the dig and plant and weed and cut and juice and boil, blood and toil required for brute cane to achieve sweet mouth, out of which would come our music. The call, Mary's version. My mother ascends a ladder of light up to the clouds. She's dressed in a lacy cloud white wedding gown. In childhood, this was my dream. My relatives told me that my mother went home to live with Jesus when I asked why she'd leave me behind to grow with others. I was raised by my dutiful aunt who cared for me, but still and all my life, I'd miss my mother, whom I'm sure would have kissed my face and hushed my cries when she untangled my hair and brushed it smooth. She'd hum a charming tune when she steam pressed my school uniform, and the knife blades would lie flat. She'd remark how I'd grown as she lotioned my limbs. She would make me polish my shoes. She'd be strict. I lived in dream state, only coming fully awake out there on the school playing fields, where I developed into an all-around athlete who one day hit a cricket ball for six so it flew the high wire fence and landed in the yard of the school for bad boys. I went to retrieve it and met with that little band some others would dismiss as waifs and strays. Just little ones, really. Poor boy Pickney, with whom I made friends. Them so in need of the mothering I myself always wanted. So I left my aunt's house at age 17. I am going to be a bride of Christ, said I. I intend to take care of his children. I will take the name of Saint Ignatius, who believed God is found everywhere in everything. You will not last one weekend inside that nunnery, she said, and handed me a thin silver sixpence for my bus fare back to Innswood, just in case. The near noonday dance of Sister Iggy. When Sister Ignatius performs her near noonday dance, the swing skirts of her long habit polish her ankles. Veni Sancti Spiritus she intones, till Paraclete manifests, enfolds her in winged arms, they waltz. Unseen yet ever near, sweet spirit turns in keyholes, pours concrete walls, limbers on the barred windows. She knows not how, but their lockstep kick steps, alleluias, alleluias, tumbling through breeze blocks. Spirit inquires, dear sister, how are our charges? You mean our boys? Lost, abandoned, wayward? Doing well. They carry the good news of our homegrown music to audiences all over the known world. They have been found, give thanks, by music's grace. Our alpha musicians are now musical ambassadors. Divine presence allows, oh Mary Ignatius, well done. Air kisses her on the brow. She finds herself alone. And Sister Iggy clasps her hands. Sister Iggy bows her head. And the bell sounds for noon prayers. Hers have been said. The Poet and Margarita. Except for that bone-handled knife bullseye in your chest, your skin is unblemished. You've stayed the same in every photograph, woman aglow. How did you find your way to where I live now? The number 12 bus I rode to go home stopped along Windward Road, where I once saw you and Marcia Griffiths at the bus stop. The two of you, luminous. No disrespect, my sisterin. I do not want to write about you. I'm done with your tragic woman story. But you just tilt your head to one side, flash that photoplay smile and say, it's because you're so easy to cry that I want you to tell them for me. Margarita's version. Our name Mahfouz means one who's well protected. And my father, Jad Aid, tried his mad complicated best to gather we his daughters like bright fish into nets. See the studio portrait of him and his 4 daughters? We are well dressed. He was a damaged, not a broke man. My mother is not in this picture. She was born a virtue who knew poems by heart, and one day careened under the wheels of a moving vehicle. Another tragic woman in a story. When my father's fish emporium burned down, unprotected, he lamented he'd not sired strong sons. I was ripped from my family picture by the dark destroyer. I sewed myself a pink cocktail-length peau de soie dress, took his band from a justice of the peace, gave him children and became battered wife who could not love, a man who used me as flesh and blood punching bag. They call me rumba dancer. I do not know what that means. I ask you to tell them for me what my father brought with him from Lebanon, a load of old hymns. He chant when sorrow washed a gray oily sea over our family life and violence dismantled our house. My father called upon the 99 names of God, the one, the healer, the compassionate, the merciful. I committed them all to memory, stored them within, till some presence began to arrange my limbs. A force lifted and set down my feet, tilted my hips, guided. They say I taught myself, but I was led to the way of wild women who sacrifice themselves to love, like the partridge who for love of the moon swallows glowing hot coals. And when my Ungu Malungu man split open my chest, his name was inscribed next to the 99 names. Who knows where or when? When or where, time or date they first met? Romantics believe that it happened one night as he performed with the scatterlights on stage, and she stood there in the wings in waiting. He sighted her up when he paused, so dizzy, more the trumpeter could solo. Don lowered his trombone and caught sight of her standing still in the wings, cool as a marble statue. Waiting in the wings, she'd always go quiet. None around her able to coax response from her, save silence. She'd look skyward, slow her heartbeat to near stop, and let the spotlight mark her place. Allow music to build suspense, made the audience wait until she was released from standstill into life again. He saw her at resurrection moment. A stone nymph who before his gaze broke free from becalmed state and with a whirlpool froth of skirts swirled into his melancholy life. She entered, aiming for the light. Testimony of our Rasta brethren. Her aspect and appearance was like that of a queen. She was one of the fairest damsels in East Kingston. And if riches were what her heart's desire had been, it would have been easy for her to catch any big money man on this island and then turn around and look down on we who grow with her in Kingston too. But she was what we call well-grounds. She identified with the rebel spirit of Rastafari, and she did not abandon the brethren, even when Babylon did designate I and I inhuman. And when Veer Johns knocked we aside and declared there was no opportunity for Rasta to perform on that stage, she, who the crowd come to see, said, if my brethren can't go on, I refuse to perform. And she was headline and star attraction. So it was that night became the hour the public came to hear what we had been preparing behind smoke screen for years. Yes, it was Margarita who opened the way for the mystic revelation. Sister Iggy and Margarita crossed over to the field of the laments. The mulatto ferryman said, you two Jamaican women have paid enough. Keep your coins. I'll row you across to the spot from where you can walk to the new green field where the ones who love without reserve gather. A lament sister, love's caretaker, stands there tall as a lighthouse. She signals to them by flashing her pearls. They disembark, she stretches out a long arm and helps them from the shores of Rock Bottom into the pasture where the clean stream of wash away sorrows runs and invites all newcomers to partake of its mineral waters. Like schoolgirls on a fun day, Margarita and Iggy wade in. They lift high the hems of gauze garments. Iggy turns to Margarita, points to her chest and asks, how are your wounds these days? And Margarita, bold-faced as always, does not hesitate to back off her blouse and bare her breast. See, she says, scars healed, polished. Sister Ignatius glances sideways. Girl, cover up yourself. You're not in a nightclub now. They laugh out loud. Says Iggy, oh Anita, Blessed Mother has answered my prayer to renew your spirit, body, mind, and soul. Margarita hugs her, says, thanks, sister. Turns and asks the attendant lament, will Malungu ever be allowed in here? Lament, that is not for me to say, but just you be still now. You might hear strains of Snowboy up in the spheres. Say something for me, English, for Paulette Wilson and Amelia Gentleman. Say something for me, English. This is what the market women call after her in Mandeville Market. Say something, anything, then say in it. We love how you talk sweet. Like how you say, that cocoa, it's a command of cocoa, in it. These days, she does not tarry long among the market women. She does not pause at the stalls to run jokes and banter with them about their prices dearer than Brixton Market. She does not scold how she can buy 3 pounds of yellow yam in England for the price of the one they're trying to sell her. Now you blighters grow the yam right here, innit? Go on, they say, you're too mean. Open your English leather purse and release some of them strong English pound you have under lockdown. What happened in English? I think you're gone back by now. Home. Her thoughts had floated on the clouds, cushioning the airplane down to soft landing. Home to her kitchen, where her red kettle waited to whistle a homecoming. First thing she'd planned to do when she'd set her suitcase down after entering into her own house purchased with money saved from 40 years of factory work was brew herself a cuppa. She could almost taste her homecoming cup of tea, the exact same blend that tastes altogether different Mhm. Tastes altogether different on the tongue when she brewed it in Jamaica. Something to do with alkalinity, difference in the waters. 60 years she has lived in the motherland, arrived there with her mother and father as a babe in arms. When they told her upon arrival that what she traveled on was not a real British passport, they said she'd been needing proof she'd been living there for 60 years. Crazy amounts of receipts from every place she's ever lived. In Britain, and no NHS, no form of benefits till it's all settled. She's back in Mandeville. She pretends it is where she wants to be. But she no longer laughs and jokes when the market women say something for me in English. And last night she saw another Windrush victim on TV who said he and his family decided that if he was deported, he'd carry enough sleeping pills with him to end it. Say something for me in English. And this is the last poem I read. It's called All Saints. It's the last poem in the book. Thank you so much for listening this long, if it's still there. All Saints. I wonder what became of Olwen Gilfillian. She was my friend in primary school. And the other children said that she and I were both inclined to be cry. But I think Olwen was even more prone than me to weep at the littlest thing. Her eyelids would tremble like moth's wings, and her big brown eyes, streaked with amber lights, like a type of tar or marble the boys played with, would brim. And she'd bite her lower lip and then commence to sobbing. For what? What you crying for, Olwen? Other children would ask, and she'd just bawl some more. And sometimes, so she'd not feel alone, I'd cry along with her. Why you crying, Olwen? Maybe she'd say something like, teacher, look at me funny. Or that boy long out him tongue at me, and that is nasty. And we'd both agree that those were things to make a 9-year-old, finely tuned girl turn on the waterworks. I think about Olwen Gilfillian these days, when the world makes me want to weep. Specifically, the pandemic makes me weep. In general, the state of the world. But I hope Olwen has thrived. I pray she's had a good life. May her eye water now fall as tears of joy. Olwen, if you happen to read this, please know that I still think of you as my friend. Olwen, named for a princess in a Welsh folk tale, your name means white footprint. I weep when I recall how our school no longer exists. No more. All Saints, Kingston, Jamaica, West Indies, the world. Thank you very much.
Lorna, thank you so much for that marvelous reading. It was just so wonderful to hear your voice. And you mentioned the pandemic in that final poem of your wonderful book, and it's a voice we need to hear, I think, all of us at the moment. And just to remind the audience here, please, if you have any questions or comments for Lorna, please add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'd love to draw you into the conversation that we're going to have about Mother Muse. Lorna, can I begin by asking you about the two remarkable women who inhabit the early part of the poem sequence you read to us just now, Sister Riggy and Margarita, and perhaps say a little bit about them and how you came to construct this wonderful book around these two remarkable women.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to everybody who is here and who's listening. Thank you. Thanks to Carcanet, Michael Schmidt, and John, and Jasmine, everybody who worked on the book and made it so beautiful. I'm very pleased with it. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to say that I never look back. I try not to, it's hard for me to read my old work, but I made myself read my very first published book, which is Tamarind Season. And I think what I realized that maybe what I'd done in that book was set up my stall, if you will, as a poet, because very much almost everything I write about has some sort of beginning in that book. And in that book is a poem for Don Drummond. It's called For Don Drummond, and it mentions Margarita. And even at that time, I was grappling with how that poor woman was so much a victim of victim blaming. You know, a lot of people were not. Anyway, I write. It's very hard. That was very hard to write about. It was very painful. But somehow I felt she wanted me, and maybe I'm being presumptuous. But all these years, I just kind of felt this nagging voice saying, "I'd like you to talk about it, write about me." So that's what happened. And then Sister Ignatius is an extraordinary human being by any standards. And I think the whole world should know about her, and the Vatican should know about her. I'm serious, because for her to have taken those boys, and I went up to the home for retired nuns in Jamaica, and I spoke with some older nuns. One of them was 100 years old, who had known her. And there's no doubt that she just had this real vocation. My friend Robert Liuzon has a book called Vocation. He understands what a vocation is. Her calling was, I said, how did she do this? And she said, well, you know, she was very athletic, and she maybe went to the fence and made friends with some of those little boys over at the orphanage. And out of that friendship between this schoolgirl and these little boys in the orphanage came this whole life dedicated to raising up children who otherwise would have just been wasted their lives with, and they were turned out to be, a lot of them, these really brilliant musicians. So I had to write about her, you know.
Yeah, and I suppose that would bring me on to another point. In what way do you see a continuity or a difference perhaps between this volume and the Magnificent Collected? You talked about Tamarind Season perhaps being the source of much of what you've gone on to write, your very first volume. Do you see continuities and differences, or more of one than the other in this new volume?
Well, I hope I'm way more certain of my craft now, obviously, you know. And I'll just say this one thing. If I felt that my work wasn't developing and growing, I would stop writing. You know, and I'm lucky and blessed to have people like you in my life, and Michael Schmidt, who never lets you get away with anything. You know, if it's rubbish, he'll tell you. And I really appreciate his, you know, his care and his guidance. You know, he's done wonderful things for me. Carcanet has done good things for me in my work. But I'm always trying to make it better. I'm always pushing it as far as I can. There are things I'm doing in there that I think some people recognize. I don't know if, or I know somebody, and you do, I know somebody like Kai Miller's mentioned what I'm trying to do, which is not easy. Sometimes I'm trying to write standard English in a way that it sounds like Creole, but it's still standard English by virtue of a line break or just some invert, you know, in almost every poem, I try to have an example of that.
Mm. So, and you bring the wild woman back as well in this collection, which I was pleased to see. She never went away.
She never went away, no. And you know, like I said, when I read Tamarind Season, I realized that so much of what I've been doing, you know, my preoccupation with things like gemstones, for example, it's filled, you know, there are topaz and moonstones and mother of pearl. There's lots of references to silver, the moon, just all kinds of things that and the politics is there. But I wrote that book in a lot of it came out in the 1970s when I was pretty politically active in Jamaica, and I used to go to a lot of rallies, for example, like anti-apartheid rallies I take part in. And I always felt that there was a danger of sacrificing the poem for the politics. So I sort of tried to keep the politics under the surface because I didn't want to get into sloganeering. But the politics, I think, was always there and always, maybe it's more evident, it's more on the surface now.
And just to kind of follow up with the last question about continuities or differences between this new volume and the collective, was there something of a kind of liberation that the collective was done? Just grab it here off my shelf so we can see.
Yes.
It's a big book, right?
Yeah.
Did you feel in a way that you kind of shed something and could, you said you always feel that you're developing as a poet Was there some kind of liberation there in
It was.
having that work out there?
Yes, and just have them all in one place. You know, yes, I thought, well, it's like, you know, when my mother had 9 children, I'm sure when she did a head count at night, she would, you know, think, oh, well, they're all inside, something like that, you know. Yes, I was very relieved because I'm not wanting to do anything but make it better, to push it more. This last, well, I'll wait for you to ask me about, you have questions, I'll shut up and have you ask me, and then I'll try to answer.
We want to hear you talk, not me, Lorna, but you talked about Don Drummond being in Tamarind Season.
Yes.
And he comes back again, I think, in Turn Thanks and maybe elsewhere in your work as well. And you also talk in one of the poet of Margarita about feeling compelled to tell this tragic woman's story, and you kind of push it back, but then you feel that you have to be her voice, you know, to give her a voice, to resurrect her, to use some of the imagery in the volume. You also talk then in the acknowledgements to Mother Muse about Jamaican music and how important that was to you as a child, and your brothers bringing music and musicians into your family home.
Yes.
Did you kind of go back to that clearly with a difference in this collection, because you are telling the story that was nagging at you, as you said, in Tamarind Season?
Yeah. Yes, my friend Tanya Shirley and I had a talk recently, and she brought that question up too. It was just in my home, and my brother sometimes say, you know, well, we should all get together and write, because all of them have been involved in Jamaican music, you know. So I can't, but just through osmosis, it was just always around me. I'm not sure what it is I'm doing. I have to be honest with you. I really don't know. Even I'm feeling my way forward where this music is concerned, because I'm afraid I could go off in all kinds of directions, and I want to kind of wait for what happened with me with Iggy, with Sister Iggy and Margarita, for me to sort of get a clear signal as to how to proceed when I'm writing about Jamaican music. If you leave one person out, you're going to be in trouble. You know, you have to tread such a careful line, and I don't know.
Okay, and there's a question from Nancy Ann Miller here in the Q&A, and Nancy's asking, she's saying your work is extremely visual.
Yes.
So do you see your poems like a painting that you fill in on the paper, or are you putting your thoughts down on paper? Do you then fill them in with visual details? I mean, do you think in images? Nancy's asking, I think.
That's a perfect example of like doing a painting. You do a drawing and then you fill in the. I'm a painter by training. I spent years, you know, of my life training to be a painter. But so, and again, to go back to Tamarind Season, I'm aware of my engagement with color in that book. There are all sorts of, all the poems have some sort of engagement with colors, the color black. And then years later, I would write a poem about, you know, to make various sorts of black. It all had a beginning in that book, you know. So yes, the answer, Nancy, is yes. I do probably, I know I do apply certain techniques I learned as a painter to my writing. You know, I always go back and, you know, in a portrait, you leave the highlights for last. And when I do a painting, a poem, I tend to go back and bring out the light. I always think in terms of, you know, dark and light. And I tend to leave the light bits for last.
Okay.
And I also have just one other last thing. The other thing is I learned as a painter is that you should always keep the canvas at the same rate, all areas at the same rate of development. Don't go off and work too much on the trees and leave the water. So I try to work on all of the poem all of the time.
Yeah, because I mean, this is such a beautiful book, Mother Muse. And I was struck by, you know, you tend to have your own paintings on the cover of your Carcanet books, but this painting has the same title as the collection, right? Mother Muse, which I don't, have you done that before? Or is this I haven't seen that identity, I'm not sure, between the painting and the poem.
Yes, you know, in the early days, what would happen was I'd do a painting and then I'd find I'd not exhausted the inspiration, or it would keep nagging at me. So it would keep going in the form, I'd write a poem about it. So usually that's what happens. And sometimes I write a poem and then I do a painting to go with it. So it's not that unusual. Because I haven't been painting for years, this is why this, you'd probably notice.
Okay. Yeah, and I was struck by the different faces melding into each other in that image on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
Is that your kind of composite Mother Muse? I mean, is that how you saw
I
it?
have no idea what I'm doing when I'm doing it. I do not want to sit here and be able to give you a full explanation of why it is the way I do not know. I did it, and actually I'm kind of surprised at it myself. Looking at it now, I thought, I don't remember doing that. That's just how it is. Yeah.
Okay, and then with that title, and the mother, is there in your work right from the very beginning, in all kinds of different ways, from the mother of Jamaica, Nanny of the Maroons, to your own great grandmother, the Guinea woman, and your own mother, of course, in so many of your poems. Now, how do you understand the Mother Muse? That when I first received the book, I was thinking, you've just come from the Laureateship, which we might talk about in a moment. So I thought Brathwaite, my mother is an island about Barbados, but clearly it's a composite of women's voices. How did you understand that title as you were working on the poems?
I didn't understand it as I was working in the poems. This collection, I think, brings together a lot of things which a lot of subjects which interest me and occupy me, and things with which I've been engaged for years and years. For example, there's an appearance of the Lament sisters from Rilke's Duena Elegies, and I love the Duena Elegies. I spent some time in Germany, and actually, my friend Wolfgang Binder, who translated my poems into German, gave me the Duena Elegies to read, and I knew that at some point I wanted a lament to appear in one of my poems. So it took years, but finally the Lament sisters have shown up in a poem. There's Marian Anderson, there's Mahalia Jackson. I'm a big Mahalia Jackson fan. There are all these women, these mother figures, really, if you will.
Yeah.
Which I felt this book finally provided a place for them.
Yeah.
To inhabit. So because they're all over the book, Yeah.
They are, yeah, and they weave in and out, and they composite with each other. And going on from that, you talked about Mahalia Jackson there, and two questions have come in. One from Lynn Innes about the rhythms of reggae music in your poetry, and a complimentary question from Asif Khan about the recent passing, very recently, of Scratch Lee Perry, and a little while back of Jean Bean Breeze as well, and their own kind of dub rhythms. How do you feel that the Jamaican music, you were saying, came into your house, an informative period for you? How do you feel it comes into the poetry?
Well, first of all, hello, Asif. He's my friend, right? Hi. But as I said, my brothers, I credit my brothers. I have 6 brothers: Howard, Vaughn, Kingsley Carl, the twins, Nigel, and Keith, my brother, Keith was a very early collector of Jamaican music. Maybe before all that, he just loved Jamaican music from the very beginning, and he'd take his pocket money and buy these little 45s and play them. So it was just there in my house. And I was also very conscious of the fact that Jamaicans, nobody ever thought that Jamaican music would become what it became, this great worldwide thing, which is the soundtrack of the modern world in many ways. Nobody ever thought it would come to that. But there was something in us, I think, in my brothers, particularly Keith and Kingsley, who were determined that this was good music. It was great. It was every bit as good as the rhythm and blues and the British pop we heard on the radio. And so you kind of felt you should champion it because it was coming from the underdog. And that's my nature anyway. There's something in me that wants to champion the voiceless and the underdog. And so I've been supporting and influenced by reggae music from the very beginning because of where it came from, largely, and because it's great.
Absolutely. And the language of Rastafari is so strong in this collection as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's the other thing. I always wanted to be able to write about Rastafari in a sort of extended, expansive way. And I couldn't do, I've tried with the rest, with dread talk in my poems, in Controlling the Silver. There's a long sequence where I talk about, where I try, but this is the first time I've had an opportunity to just write from the heart about what would make somebody embrace that way of life. Really, if you went to school when we went to school, and honestly, that's Gingang Gully Gully Wash Wash. I think it was written by Baden Powell, the scout man. And it's nonsense. But you'd go to school and they'd expect you to seriously sing that. So I'm thinking that's what happened with somebody like us. You sit in school and you hear this and you think, I'm not putting up with this anymore. So you go off and you create your own music. It's just my thinking about how it may have been,
Did that then kind of increase your imaginative empathy with Margarita, because she climbs out of the window at night to go to the Rastas, doesn't she? And she's drawn by the chanting and the sound of the drum.
Yeah, absolutely. She's a bit of a wild woman, and I identify with that. And, but more than anything else, I think that she should be understood she was an artist at a time when there were no institutions per se for somebody like her to, perfect her art. So she ended up dancing in nightclubs. If it were now, she would just, the school of dance, and she would dance with NDTC, but both the two of them, and he would have maybe had better access to help for his mental health problems. But they were both people who were ahead of their time, and there were just nothing to support them and help them, not very much.
Yeah. And a couple more questions come in, Lorna, from Tanya. She's praising the kind of wonderful fusion of the spiritual and secular in your work, and then asking you about the kind of erotic register of this volume and how you might have felt about that.
It's a good thing. What can I say? Well, I mean, that's very much, part of the whole creation process. And, I don't know, what can I say? Tanya, yes, it's in there. That's all I said, erotic. I didn't think about it. I think it was organic. It was just in what I was doing, this with as much integrity and as much sincerity as I possibly could, So if that is in there, then that is because it's supposed to be in there, and it's an integral part of it.
And that might lead on to the other comment or question we have in the Q&A, which is from Michael Schmidt himself, no less. And he's really just saying that your poems make him cry.
Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. And I know, I mean, the poem ends, the volume rather, Mother Muse ends with that, and you being cry at school, and the way in which these people you write about can produce that kind of affect in you.
Yes.
Can you talk to that a little bit? I mean, do you have to have that kind of emotional investment in the voices that you channel and the stories that you tell in a collection like this?
I'll answer you in this way. For years, I tried not to be a poet. I really did, because I had a sense, because I think in pictures, I always had a sense that I was standing at the edge of the great dark sea or body of darkness, and I would have to cross it in order to write these poems. I don't want to be melodramatic, but that's true. And I tried every way not to do it, but somehow I knew I had to. And the sadness and the pain, and it is a very real part of it. And there have been poems I've written, like cry. I've been on the floor writing them. It's as if I have to pass through this in order to get to it. But I have accepted that is the corollary to this gift. And I'm not trying to make people unhappy or anything, but some things are, overwhelmingly, they make you cry. That's all I can say. And they do. I cry a lot. I'm a cry person. That's what Jamaicans in school, when you cry a lot, they say, you're so cry.
You're a cry. And I mean, with being poet laureate, and it's a great honor, do you think that affected or inflected the poetry that you wrote, as it were, under that rubric of being laureate of the island? Did you find it, I suppose I'm asking if you found it slightly a constraint as well as an honor?
Yes, it was, but I wrote some, no, I wrote some public poems, you know, and you saw that that sequence of emancipation. But that
Yeah.
was kind of my personal thing because I was born on Emancipation Day, and I just think that we should have poems about emancipation because, you know, anyway. But those were the public poems I wrote. But for my own, I didn't do a lot of my own work. These poems in Mother Muse I'd started years before I became poet laureate. I'd been just working away at them, working away at them. And they, as John McAuliffe rightly told you, a lot of them came in at the end. And that was after I'd given up the laureateship. So I worked a lot at the beginning, then there was a laureateship in the middle, and then at the end, I finished these poems.
And with the laureateship, I mean, wonderful as those poems are, and many of them are, you know, in this collection as well. I mean, did you feel that you have a phrase in one of your early poems, I'm not quite sure where it is, about having to toe the line? It's a phrase you play with.
Yes.
Did you feel that you had to do that, that you perhaps couldn't have Margarita's poems or even Sister Riggy's as public poetry? You talked about the difference perhaps between private imagination and the public realm.
Perhaps you're right. I hadn't thought of it at all. Maybe if I'd finished them, I would have tried them out, but no, I didn't. I was just so, okay. The thing about being poet laureate is that when I became poet laureate, I was asked to do this. I just really had a sense that what I was to do, I wanted to do, was to open the way for as many young people who don't get a chance. There are people, you know, if you have there are people who are established poets and they have books and they have magazines and so on. And I could have spent more, maybe what I wanted to do was to just, I know there are people all over Jamaica who are poets, young people. And I remember being a young poet myself and thinking, what do I do? So starting the prizes and I did workshops everywhere and just doing things like that. And my To Us All Flowers or Roses program, where we taught these young ladies basic self-defense, and then we made them write poems, and it was just one of the most wonderful things. We actually took that program to an orphanage on the western end of the island, and talk about crying. There are children in that orphanage who wrote poems that just, you know, I can't think about it without crying right now. And you just know that all people I was just trying to provide hope and possibility where I could.
And so it sounds like there are very real continuities, you know, with how you've positioned yourself as a poet, a kind of intercessor and sometimes a healing figure as well in relation to a troubled
place. If I possibly could do anything like that, that's what I tried to do, yes.
Yeah, and that, of course, that's what Sister Iggy did so well, as she puts on her boxing gloves and brings the records into the school, you know.
It's true, you know, she was a DJ, she had a sound system. I think it's still there, I've seen pictures of it. And one of my brothers, Carl, is a social worker, and he tells a brilliant story about working with her to try to find the parents of somebody who went on to be a very successful Jamaican musician. And he said the two of them were like detectives just trying to track down his relatives. So he had enormous respect for her and how sincere and dedicated she was to the welfare of these boys.
And is Sister Riggy, is she widely remembered in present day Kingston?
I don't know. I hope so. I think so. I'm hoping that now if I can do something, if these poems might just, you know, give her a little bit of presence.
Absolutely, and Margarita as well.
Oh, absolutely, because she had gifts. What I did was I just read widely from newspaper clippings. I tried not to. I tried to give her dignity and not go too deeply into her personal. I just dealt with what was in the newspapers or one or two, you know, stories I'd heard. But it seems from everyone who knew her or had any sort of dealings with her that she was a wonderful friend. One of our friends, her fellow dancer, said, if you ever told her something in confidence, you'd never hear it again. And her act of saying to this man who ran this well-known stage show, where, you know, an opportunity knocks, it was called, and she was a star attraction, and she brought her Rasta friends, and he said Rastafarians cannot perform on my stage, and she said, well, if they can't go on, I can't go on. Friendship, again and again, they're just examples of people saying what a good friend she was. And, so that I was trying to make her more, she's a human being. She also had her 3 children taken from her. Or I'm not sure how many children she has. I think it was 2 or 3. But they were taken from her. And it is there, I read it in the papers, the account of her going to the courts and petitioning to get her children back. Mm. And as just one person said, maybe if she had had her children, she wouldn't have had to be pouring her. Mm. This man was really very, very violently ill.
Mm-hmm. So I can't think of a better way to bring them back, as it were, insofar as we can, than in this very wonderful volume of poetry. I'm aware we're kind of running out of time, so I might just before I hand back to Jazz to conclude the evening, just say thank you to everybody for your wonderful questions, and please join me as I turn thanks, to use your phrase, a Jamaican phrase, to the remarkable Lorna Goodison. Thank you so much for sharing this new volume with us and for discussing the poems with me and our audience this evening. Lorna, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all nice people who came out. God bless you. Thanks, Patrick, over there in Ireland. I see some people. Thank you. Kisses, everybody. Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you for reading to us. Thanks for discussing the book so openly with Lee as well. And thank you, Lee, for hosting. It's just been such a great evening, and I really, really enjoyed it. Please, everyone, go and buy the book. I mean, obviously, you should already have a copy, but if you don't, there's the link for you in the chat there, and there's a discount code so you can get £2 off. If you don't want to do that right now, don't worry, check your emails tomorrow, and it's coming for you in your emails, and get in touch with me if you have any problems with that. So the last thing that I need to say is please join us again next week. We're launching a new book by Rod Mengham. We are launching Midnight in the Cant Hotel, Art in Present Times, a collection of essays, and he's going to be talking to Timothy Matthews about that next week. So check the website for the details about that. And I will just leave the chat open for a couple more minutes so you can get your final messages in there. But that's everything from us tonight. So thanks again, and congratulations, Lorna, and thank you all for being here.